Christian to Heresy Part 1. One of the primary problems of early Christianity was that of heresy. Heresy is generally defined as a departure from the traditional Christian beliefs. The creation of new ideas, rituals and forms of worship within the Christian Church. This was especially dangerous to a faith in which for a long time the rules as to what was the proper Christian belief remained very vague and open to interpretation. Gnosticism. The Gnostics were a sect older than Christianity itself. They had already used Jewish faith as a basis with which they mixed many Eastern myths as well as Greek philosophy. Gnosis equals knowledge. Due to the multitude of influences, Gnosticism varied largely in its forms. With the emergence of Christianity, bits and pieces of Christian faith were integrated into Gnosticism. The main differences with Christianity and Gnostic belief were that God, who was purely good, could not have created the world, as the world contained evil. Hence Gnosticism created a mythology much like Greek mythology in which numerous other forces were the children of God. These children in turn created our world. One such child was Christ, who descended to earth to share his knowledge, some secret knowledge of which the Gnostics claimed to be only part of their religion, the unwritten, verbal knowledge passed on by Christ. Also associated with Gnosticism are the beliefs that all matter was evil, including the human body, and that Christ's divine spirit only descended into the man Jesus with his baptism and left him before his crucifixion, leaving the man, not the Messiah, to suffer on the cross. The greatest challenge to traditional Christianity posed by Gnosticism was by Marcion, AD 100-160. The son of a bishop, probably even a bishop himself, Marcion came to Rome sometime after AD 138. With his expulsion from the church for heresy, his followers formed themselves into a separate body, calling themselves the Marcionites, though they are also known as the first dissenters. Gnosticism survived long into the Middle Ages, and echoes of it are still to be heard in the teachings of the current-day Theosophical movement. Marcionism survived until about the 5th century AD. Montanism is named after its founder Montanus, though the movement is also known as the Phrygians. The sect was founded in about AD 156 by Montanus in Phrygia, a small province in Turkey. The movement was a response to what Montanus saw as the relaxation in Christian zeal by the church itself. All his followers, not merely the priests, were discouraged from marriage. Second marriages were absolutely forbidden. Martyrdom was invited. Any followers who declined a chance of martyrdom was condemned. Also, harsh regimes of fasting were followed. The sect also was convinced that the end of the world was imminent and that Christ was to return in the immediate future. One can't help but still feel today, on reading such broad details about this sect, that there was a strong air of fanaticism about this group. The movement continued until the 6th century, when Emperor Justinian vehemently suppressed it. Loyal to their creed, as well as fanatical, the Montanists of Constantinople rather committed suicide than surrender. They gathered in their churches and then set light to them, perishing in the flames. Monarchianism. The challenge to Christianity posed by monarchianism was very subtle in nature. Though despite this apparent subtlety, monarchianism would be of great influence upon Christianity as well as the Roman Empire, for it is generally understood to have been responsible for the subsequent rise of Arianism. There are two main versions of monarchianism: dynamic and modalistic monarchianism. Dynamic monarchianism stated that Jesus was an ordinary man, in whom had been placed a divine power by God. Dynamis is Greek for power. Sometimes dynamic monarchianists are called adoptionists, as they claimed that the divine power descended upon Christ at his baptism and again after his resurrection. This form of monarchianism first came into the world through Theodotus, or Theodorus, a tanner in Constantinople, who insisted that Christ was a simple man. Theodotus was excommunicated in AD 198, but disciples of his would continue the battle for some time to come. Modalistic monarchianism claimed that the Trinity were three modes, different aspects of God. God, they believed, would manifest himself as the Father, the Son, and as the Holy Spirit, whenever he found it necessary. Modalist monarchianism is perhaps best attributable to Praxeas of Asia Minor and Notus, the bishop of Smyrna. It made its way to Rome in the form of Sabellianism due to Sabellius of Pentapolis in Cyrenaica, and for some time did not clash with traditional teaching and the papacy. But sometime into the reign of Pope Callistus AD 217-222, the modalists lost favor. Sabellius and his followers were excommunicated. Despite this, the movement survived and even tried to set up its own church and bishop in Rome. After Sabellius' death in AD 257, modalistic monarchianism continued to flourish, particularly in the east in his homeland of Cyrenaica. There some bishops even became Sabellians, though just as modalistic monarchianism was being clamped down upon by the papacy, the dynamic form of monarchianism renewed its challenge. Paul of Samosata, the bishop of Antioch AD 260-272, preached that Jesus was a common man. Councils of bishops were called in AD 264 and AD 268, and Paul of Samosata was condemned as a heretic. The council then for the first time appealed to civil powers of the emperor to aid it, setting a dangerous precedent for the future. Paul of Samosata though managed to hold on to his office as he enjoyed the support of Queen Zenobia. However, with the victory of Emperor Aurelian over Zenobia and the subsequent destruction of the Palmyrene Empire, Paul was swept aside. Despite its defeat by the traditional church, monarchianism survived in the eastern part of the empire for many years. And the monarchian type of thinking is largely seen as responsible for the next heresy to come along, Arianism. Arius was a priest in Alexandria, who eventually should create a stone which should rock the very fundament of Christendom. It all began as he protested against what he called the Sabellianism of his bishop, Alexander of Alexandria. Arius claimed that to teach that both the Father and the Son had always been, was to claim them as being one and the same thing. Hence he accused his bishop of being a monarchian. What arose was a large-scale quarrel throughout the church if the Father had been there before the Son, or if he had created him. More so, both sides claimed the other as being heretic. Alexander now called a council of 100 bishops from Egypt and Libya. Arius was condemned and excommunicated. But Arius in turn had already sought to find support in Palestine and Asia Minor. Councils of bishops in Bithynia and Palestine decided the councils called by Alexander to have been wrong and reinstated Arius. It was eventually Emperor Constantine who, after reuniting the empire and championing the cause of the Christians, called for the famous Council of Nicaea, where no less than 300 bishops, together with hundreds of other clergy, were gathered to decide this problem. The immediate result of this council was the Caesarean Creed, which overruled the Arians. But most of the creeds defined in the Caesarean Code could be accommodated by the Arians, by reinterpreting the words into a different meaning. More so, in AD 327 Arius was reinstated by Emperor Constantine, and Eusebius of Nicomedia, perhaps Arius' closest ally, was not only recalled from exile but became one of Constantine's advisors. In effect, the emperor had reversed his decision. Several of the bishops who had brought about the Caesarean Creed were deposed. With Constantine's 2 years after the demise of Arius followed a confused period, which even saw the return of a pagan emperor to the throne, Julian the Apostate. The confusion lasted for years until eventually the Emperor Theodosius ascended to the eastern throne. He at once began to impose the views of the Caesarean Creed concluded at the Council of Nicaea. He rid himself of the Arian bishop of Constantinople, Gregory Nazianzus, and convened the Second Great Council, this time in Constantinople itself in AD 381. Here the so-called Nicene Creed was defined. In essence it was the same as the Caesarean, but with minor changes. Together with his main ally, Ambrose, Bishop of Milan, Theodosius pushed the Arians out of office, and by the end of Theodosius' reign the Nicene Creed was the official religion of the Roman world. But Arianism survived for a long time, no small thanks to having a strong foothold within the new kingdoms of the Germanic tribes. Only by the 8th century had Arianism finally disappeared. Apollinarianism. The heresy of Apollinarianism is named after Apollinarius, Bishop of Antioch. From about AD 360 onwards, his theory that Christ had no human soul or spirit, but a divine one, began to circulate among the Christian thinkers. It was an attempt by Apollinarius to reason that Jesus was free of sin, purely divine. This led to a series of edicts by church councils which condemned Apollinarianism as heresy. It was found that Apollinarius' idea of a Christ without a human soul made his suffering meaningless, turned his prayers into a charade. Only if Christ also possessed a human soul and spirit could he have suffered temptation, etc. Apollinarianism was not at all of the threat to traditional Christianity as Arianism was. The many edicts against it suppressed it early on, and it merely survived until the AD 420s.